Welcome to a new episode of On the Flight Line. I'm Marcus Gropel, and today we are joined by a pilot of one of my personal favorite warbirds, the B-25. Welcome, Bud Carter. How are you doing today?
Doing very good, thank you.
So let's take it all the way back to the beginning. When were you born?
November 12th, 1924, in Los Angeles, and I found a birth certificate, a bill from the hospital, $25 for the week.
For the week?
I figured I'm worth that. No kidding. That's
really? It was $25?
I have a real copy of the real bill that my mother got for my birth at the hospital.
Oh my gosh, $25, and converted to today's money, what is probably more than a couple hundred there. So you're Southern California native, so
right, yeah.
So you got the nice, the weather, right? So you can't go anywhere else.
I wonder when I retired. My wife and I decided to look around, find some place where we might want to spend our last day. Every time we'd come back to Laguna, we'd say, "You crazy guy! Why leave here?
Why leave? You got the 70-degree weather, the sunshine, and all that, right?" So let's go into your high school days when you found out about the war. Do you remember where you were the day that you found out about that?
Oh, yeah, I do. I was a junior at South Pasadena High School at the time, and the Saturday before the actual bombing raid, the biggest worry I had was whether Pat Gibbs would go to the school dance with me or not. I woke up the next morning, turned the radio on, of course, no television, and all of a sudden our country's at war. And it affected everybody. When I went to school the following Monday, almost half of the senior boys were not there. They were in Los Angeles signing up
to go into the service.
Yeah, to get into the war. Right. It was all or nothing at all.
So so you were a junior. So you weren't of age yet, right, to enter the service?
No, I was 17, and when you're 17 and a half, you have to go in and sign up with the government, and that's a draft. If your number comes up, then you go in the other way. And the way I got in, I had always liked airplanes as a kid. I used to make model airplanes and go down to the airport on weekends, stuff like that. So I knew that I was going to be into the war, and I was healthy and the right age. So I went to the Army Air Corps and volunteered and put my name in. And a couple of months after I got 18, I got the letter. I was in.
That you were in.
Yeah.
So after you graduated from high school.
Well, actually, I didn't go through graduation. I left in April of 1943 to get in the military, and of course the graduation was in June. Well, by June, I was a soldier. I was learning how to be a soldier.
To get ready, to get already on. But you completed the high school program, right?
My diploma was mailed to me by the high school.
Oh.
I didn't.
You didn't walk, but you got the finish.
Yeah.
So did you, while you were in training, did you also go to college at the same time while you were training? Or?
Well, the first one kind of an interesting side story about that training. I went up to Ogden, Utah, and it was just basic training, learning how to march and be a soldier and that sort of thing. And I went in with three other fellows from my high school, friends of mine, and we were all in the same tent together. And after a couple of days of marching, I got an infected toe, and I bad enough that I had to go into the infirmary. And I was there for 3 days, and when I got out of the infirmary, I went back to the tent to meet my guys, and that morning, all of them had been shipped out.
Oh, they were already pulled.
They were in the military, and they were shipped out, and because they were friends of mine from high school, I was able to keep track with them, and three of those guys ended up in combat, and I never did. And I've often thought to myself how little things in life can have really a major effect on what happens the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. So you had the toe, and then next thing you know, the people you were talking to the day before were already gone.
That's right. Well, from there, then I went to as an officer. You're supposed to have been graduated or had some college education,
mm-hmm.
and of course, I was just out of high school. So they took us to. I went to Hays, Kansas,
mm-hmm.
and I was there for, as I recall, about 7 months. And they just rammed a college course.
They really gave it to you, huh?
Yeah. And while I was there, it was kind of interesting. The groundskeepers were prisoners of war from Germany.
Oh, really?
I often wondered, those guys were looking at us who are training to go over and shoot their brothers. But yeah, so I got a year's college credit.
A year's college credit for while you were there.
Yeah.
So at least you got a little bit of training. So when you got out of the service, you had a little bit more.
Yeah, right. No, there was emphasis on navigation and meteorology and things like that, but it was a pretty general college course.
So you were in the service now in training. Were you expecting? What was your end goal? Were you wanting to be a pilot? Were you wanting to be a navigator, bombardier? What were your
pilot?
Pilot?
Of course.
Any particular aircraft during that time, or was it a B-25?
Oh no! You had no say.
You had no say. You just got sent to doing that. So let's start with your basic training. How did you learn to fly? On what aircraft?
Well, let me tell you another little story.
Okay.
From Hays, Kansas. We got on a troop train, and we're heading to the pre-flight school. Pre-flight school is where they tested to see whether you're going to be a pilot, navigator, bombardier, or washed out. But typical of the wartime, we had no idea where we were going. We could have gone anywhere in the world, anywhere in the United States. And I woke up, I got at this base at night. It was dark, and climbed into bed upstairs in the second floor. And the next morning I woke up and looked out on Newport Beach. I couldn't believe how lucky I was that I ended up at Santa Ana Army Air Base, which is in Costa Mesa, as you know. Yeah.
Which is now OC Fairgrounds, right?
Orange County Fairgrounds, and right, the fairgrounds and the college and the city hall. That was all one big, huge
airfield,
air base at the time. They ran 24,000 cadets a year through there.
Really?
During the war years, yeah.
So imagine nowadays, it's all this development, and when you were there, was it all just flat land, or was it?
Oh yeah, it's just one big huge base. There was no airfield there, but it was just an Army base. It went from Harbor Boulevard to Newport Boulevard, and Baker to Wilson. Wow. And it was all military at that time.
So was that where you learned to fly? Was that your basic training?
No. That was where they would decide which branch or where you're going, whether you'd be a navigator, bombardier, or pilot. And luckily, I qualified for the pilot training. And from there, I went up to a place called Little Field up in Northern California called Dos Palos. And that's where I started to learn. That's where I learned how to fly. They had the Stearmans there, and you'd go about maybe 6 or 7 hours and of instruction, and you'd land, and the pilot would get out and say, "Okay, bud, take it up," and that was your solo flight, which was kind of exciting.
So let's take it back to your solo flight. Do you remember how it all went down your first time by yourself up in the air?
I was very comfortable. I don't recall. I just loved to fly.
Yeah, you love the open space up in the sky.
Oh yeah, it was an open cockpit airplane, of course.
So you got the wind going.
The wind going, and I remember one time the instructor was introducing me to aerobatics, and he wanted me to do a snap roll. And I had thought about how to do this in bed the night before. Let's see, you put the stick in the rudder, and I did it, and it was a pretty nice snap roll.
Wow!
And the instructor said, "You've been practicing, haven't you?" No.
So you went from that was it primary training?
That was primary, okay. Yeah, and I had about 75 hours, as I recall, from there, and then from there I went to Taft, which is just outside of Bakersfield. We learned to fly the Vultee vibrator. They called it that because anytime you did aerobatics, the canopy rattled so much that you thought the plane was falling apart.
What a nice nickname then, huh? That gives you a lot of confidence to go.
Vultee vibrator. And I was there for about 2.5, 3 months. And then from there, I graduated and went to Luke Field, which is just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. And there we started to fly the AT-6, the North American AT-6, and that was a real joy. I just loved that airplane.
Was it easy to fly, or was it you just knew how to fly it right there?
Well, I may sound like I'm patting myself on the back, but I had a lot of fun flying, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I had no problem.
No problem with it. So after your T6 training, was that when they decided to put you on a B-25, or how did that process go?
Well, yeah, it was. Actually, I was in what they called a holdover class. By the time I was there, it was November of 1944. The war was almost over. It was winding down, and they didn't know what to do with us guys. We weren't needed. They didn't need replacement pilots over in combat. So I was with the holdover class. I ended up flying about 160 hours, which is normally about twice what you would do and normal. Flying the AT-6, and they just hand keys to the airplane and say, go fly somewhere. And there's no radar at that time, so you could literally fly anywhere you wanted. I just get in a plane, fly around Arizona. Used to fly down to Grand Canyon for the heck of it, and
wow, the freedom!
So, it was wonderful. Yeah.
got to fly. Just kind of like it's like getting in your car on a weekend and just saying, I'm gonna go on PCH or something.
Exactly.
That was your joyride for the weekend, right?
Yeah.
So was there? I know, like, the T6 is kind of like a trainer aircraft. How was it getting accustomed to the B-25?
Very interesting. Normally, when you go into a twin engine, prior to that, you would have learned as a cadet to fly in a multi-engine airplane. But it was kind of unusual that I went from single engine to a multi-engine, the B-25, after I graduated, and the reason I think was that I eventually was slated to go into the P-61, the Black Widow. Now that's a twin-engine airplane, but it's a single pilot. In other words, there's no co-pilot. So I have an idea that's why I went from single engine to multi-engine, because I was going to end up as a single pilot airplane. Well, in fact, that never happened because the war ended.
Right when that happened. Okay.
Yeah. So I had the same experience in the B-25 that I did in the AT-6. They didn't know what to do with us. It was a holdover class. I ended up with about 200 hours in the B-25, and normally it would have been about 75. But they just give us the keys and say, go fly somewhere.
So you started racking up the hours as it went
on? Oh yeah, yeah. And I guess I have one story to tell. Do you know where Crystal Cove is, where the little cottages are? My parents had a cottage there during the war, and I was flying out of Douglas, Arizona. I'd call my mom and dad and say, "Are you going to be at the beach house today?" Yeah. I would take a look around 2:00, and I'd get my B-25 and fly out to Newport Beach and buzz over the pier at Newport and put an air show on for my mom and dad. And I've often thought, what must my mom and dad have been thinking? Here's a 20-year-old son just out of high school flying a twin-engine bomber just for their for their show.
Just for them.
My name is Bud, and my mother used to put towels on the sand. Hi, Bud. So that's my war story.
Oh, so you got to go. Was it along the beach? So you got to see.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh. I made 2 trips to Southern California. The one other trip, I was flying up around Pasadena because that's where I grew up in San Marino, and I flew kind of low, I guess. Anyway, the week after that, I had leave, and I came home, and I went to my local barber right up the street from where my house is, and to get my hair cut. And he saw that I was in the Air Force. He said, "Boy, some damn fool came over last weekend so low he almost knocked all the bottles off of the wall." And I thought, I don't think I want to tell him that was me.
And you're like, did it instantly click? You're like, oh, I think that was me. It was.
It just clicked. Yeah.
So the war was winding down. I want to ask, how did your parents feel about you joining the service so early, right out of high school? Were they on board?
Well, everybody was doing it. It wasn't unusual. Everybody right out of high school, when you became 18, you were in the military.
There was no question.
So there was no question about it. My parents just took it in stride. It's just part of what's happening in the war. That you're a young man. You're going to be there
Mm-hmm.
I know my mother actually was kind of a typical housewife at that time. Never learned to drive, had never had a job. After the war started, she signed up and worked for a little company in South Pasadena that made light bulbs that went into airplanes.
Oh.
And I remember my mother telling me after the war that she was so careful when she was building these light bulbs because she never knew whether one of them might end up in an airplane that I was flying.
Oh, so she was very careful,
Very
particular.
careful and particular, yeah. Yeah.
So she really made everything with love, because she knew maybe one day it could have possibly
That's
that
right.
it could have been on an airplane.
That's right.
So, do you have any stories or fun stories about when you were flying or during your training sessions?
Well, I can remember two things. One, when I was at Santa Ana Army Air Base, you'd go through all of these tests day in and day out. At the end of the day, they'd post the names of the guys who had washed out on the barrack wall. But anyway, when I was going through one of the days, I had gone through the color, whether you're colorblind or not. And I went up to the sergeant who was saying, he said, "That's too bad. So you didn't pass." I said, "Wait a minute. What do you mean I didn't pass?" He said, "You're colorblind." I said, "No, it can't be." "Oh, wait a minute." He said, "Oh, that's a D, not a B." "Oh, okay, you're okay." My heart pumped a little bit on that one.
Oh, because that would have been the time that they would have.
I would have been washed out.
Oh gosh.
And the another experience I remember having up in primary, they'd have, after so many hours, they would have a test. I'm not sure what you'd call it, a check pilot. Somebody who was really experienced, and he was going to be, if you didn't pass with that check pilot, you'd be washed out. And I can remember coming in for a landing, I had a crosswind, this is on the Stearman, and almost ground looped. And I just had a heck of a time, but I was able to level it out, and I didn't dig a wing in, everything was okay. And I remember the instructor, the check pilot saying, he said, "I was thinking of not passing you because you were too not aggressive enough."
Not aggressive.
Not aggressive enough, but after that landing, I think I'll go ahead and get you passed.
So you got your pass for that one.
So that was okay. Then the other time when I was flying up in Luke Field, as I say, we had plenty of time just to fool around. I can remember one story. We had the flight suits, of course, we had safety belts, so you couldn't put your hands in the pocket, so they had what they called a knee pocket. And if I was going to be up any length of time, I'd put a Hershey bar in my knee pocket. And one day I was doing some aerobatics, and I flew upside down, and a darn Hershey bar fell out and hit the top of the canopy. And when I rolled around again, it fell right down to the bottom of the plane. And I thought, well, darn if I'm going to let the mechanic eat that tomorrow, what to do? Rolled upside down again. This time the Hershey bar fell out. I reached up and grabbed it and ate it, and that's my other war story. Okay.
So there we go. You got your sugar fixing that day,
right.
with the candy. So, so the war has ended. Did you want to stay? Did you end up wanting to stay longer, or did you end up leaving?
No. Ended up. I got out in I think November, as I recall, 1945, and it was interesting. The war's over. I'm not in the military anymore. I have a new life, and the past is all the past. You didn't even think about it. I ended up going to college at University of Oregon, and I can remember we were the first group that returned after the war, called the first group of men, which was kind of nice because up until that time it had been almost all girls. So all of a sudden the men came into the picture. So it was a nice relationship between the but what I meant to say was that the fellows that almost all of us were ex-military, and nobody ever talked about it. The war was over, it was done, period. We had one fellow who was a tail gunner in a B-17. He had been shot down, had been in a prisoner of war for months, And one of the newer classmates, who was an officer at the fraternity that I was in, was ready to give him a spanking or pounding on the rear end because of something he did wrong. And the poor guy ended up on the floor. He didn't know that he was dealing with an ex-prisoner of war.
After you left the service, did you want to continue flying, or did you want to just go back to civilian life?
Well, I would like to have, and I applied for a couple of jobs, flying jobs, and one of them I was in Burbank, and it was a application that we were applying for a job with an airline, and I was listening to the conversation of the guys around me, and they had 2,000 hours twin engine time flying over the hump, and I thought to myself, there's no way, I've got 200 hours, they've got 2,000 hours multi-engine, so it was hard to get a job at that time. Yeah, I would like to have stayed in, but it just wasn't in the cards. I did get an instructor's rating, and I did teach.
You got to teach, okay, so you got a little bit more aviation.
I had 4 years in a GI program, and I had already a year's credit from the time that I spent at Hays, Kansas. So I got my instructor's rating, and when I was up at Eugene, I spent a little spare time instructing people how to fly, and that was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. No scary stories for that one, right? Did you have
no
moments with the student? You were just kind of like, why did I do this?
No, I this is kind of a dumb story. One student that I had was just terrible, and he had no depth perception at all. And I just said, I'm sorry, I can't teach you anymore. In fact, I'd suggest you drop out of the program. He didn't. Mm-hmm. And 2 months later, he died in an airplane crash. He spun in. Mm-hmm. So that's a nothing story.
That's you. Okay, let's talk about your life after and kind of more current today.
You ended up marrying your sweetheart, didn't you?
You ended up marrying the sweetheart?
Remember the story, or remember when I said the biggest worry I had before the war started was whether Pat Gibbs would go to the school dance with me or not. Well, she did. And after the war, we were married, and we have been married for 68 years now. So that's another nice war story.
That's a nice war story. You got to marry your high school sweetheart.
Exactly.
So let's talk about more today, where we're sitting today here at Lion Air Museum. How long ago did you join us? How did we get so lucky here to get you here?
A friend of mine who is friends with Mark, and a lifelong friend of mine that I grew up with, we were having lunch one day, and he suggested that I give it a try. He said, why don't you go up and see about becoming a docent? So I phoned and made an appointment, and I talked to Jade, and that was that.
Next thing you know, you're here.
Yeah.
How many years now has it been? Gosh, a long time,
3.5, 4. I think it's been at least 4 years.
4 years,
as I recall.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, this has been a lifesaver for me.
Lifesaver.
It is. I talk to the kids about. I'm 94 years old now, and I don't have many friends left. They've died, and I have to say my group of friends are the docents here. These are my buddies. These are my friends. So I look forward to coming in and lying to each other.
So what are your favorite days coming on during the week here? You like your Mondays, right? And you do your Mondays?
Yeah, I tell you, I enjoy the school years when the school kids come in. I've gotten to the point where I really enjoy that. It's a lot of fun, and I think I've finally, after a year or so, I've got a talk down where the kids seem to be interested in it. I tell them what it was like to be a teenager during World War II, and then we're standing right by the B-17, and then I'll say, okay, and then I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to take you on a mission in this B-17. And the kids' eyes light up.
Oh, they get all like,
And they just think that's great. And I said, who wants to be the ball turret gunner? Everybody raises their hand. So anyway, I enjoy that. And then I enjoy Fridays a lot because a bunch of old pilots seem to be there on Fridays.
What's your guys' name? Did you guys create a whole group name? Wasn't it
Tail Spinners?
The Tail Spinners. That's what they're called. Friday mornings. That's the day that they come in. Well, I got wind of a letter that you had written, and that you were saying that you get more being here than
I'm sorry?
you get more being here at the museum than you're giving back. Can we talk about that letter?
Yes, I remember writing that because you walk up to somebody, you have no idea who they are, and it turns out that I have met more interesting people to take them around. Mm-hmm. For instance, one day I had a nice young lady and asked her if she'd like a tour. She said yes, walked around. Finally, I found out, as I questioned her, she was a pilot on a B-1 bomber.
On a B-1 bomber?
And she's a tiny petite little lady, and you flying. So I ended up learning. I talked to her a lot about that. Very often, I end up learning more about things in the airplane world than I've been able to give to the other people. Because we get a lot of pilots that come here that are, they're waiting for their flight the next day. They're flying the huge.
Big jets.
The big jets, yeah. So it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
It's the interesting people you get to meet.
Oh, absolutely.
You never know what kind of person you're gonna get.
That's right.
Could be a pilot. Could be X this, X that. It's really interesting.
Last Monday, I was giving a tour to some people from England, and I went up to C-47, talked about the fact that it was flying, during D-Day. And this little fellow in the background said, "Oh yes, that's the Dakota, isn't it?" And I said, "Well, yeah." He said, "Well, that's the plane. I was a parachutist during the war, in England, and that's what they called the C-47. There was the Dakota. So that's the type of thing I'm talking about, where you never know what you're going to find.
It's always a different day every time you come through here. It's never the same day twice.
No, that's for sure.
It's always fun. You've been here for Lion Air Racing 4 years, and I just did the number, over 750 hours you've been here.
That's unbelievable. I can hardly believe it.
But all of us here, we want to thank you for, even though you didn't say combat, but we want to thank your selflessness, your willingness to go out there whenever you were called. There was no doubt in you, and we just wanted to say thank you for that, because you are inspiring, I think, the future generations to be that same way as well. We want to say thank you for that.
Well, I thank you, and I have to say that I feel embarrassed when people say that to me, thank you for your service, because the fact of the matter is I had a ball during World War II. I hate to admit it, but I was one of the lucky ones. Mm-hmm. Never got overseas, never had shot at anybody. Nobody ever shot at me. And I was learning how to fly. I would have paid the government to do that. Mm-hmm. So it was one of the high spots of my life, was the 2.5 years that I was in the military. So, I've been one of the lucky ones.
The lucky ones, but you were ready to go.
Oh, sure. I couldn't wait. Yeah.
And you were good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Okay. We have out of time, but I want to say thank you so much for joining us and telling your story, and we look forward to having you back around. And you can find Bud Mondays and Fridays. Monday morning, Friday morning, right?
Yeah,
both days.
Well,
thank you so much, Bud. Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode. I want to especially thank our special guest, Bud Carter, for joining us. And if you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and more. This has been Marcus Gropel with On the Flight Line. Till we meet again, and blue skies to you.